Railroads in the West. How are they not laissez-faire and railroad subsidies? Okay, let's first define the term laissez-faire. Elena.
It's like a government where you do whatever you want.
Right. The government does not impose a lot of rules and regulations, or they don't help, etc. It's hands-off government. So with railroads, I would have said the government wouldn't have helped railroad companies in any way, shape, or form. But what kinds of subsidies did railroad companies get? This was in your book. I don't know that I ever really talked about this, but Dylan's going to build a railroad that goes from Las Vegas to Reno. Okay, he plots out the land he needs to build that railroad. He needs roughly 100 yards all the way from here to Reno in the line. The government, between the state of Nevada and the federal government, gives him a mile on each side of his line in order to build that railroad. Now, does he need 2 miles of land? No, I've just said he needs 100 yards. So what's he going to do with those 2 miles of land? He's going to sell that land to people who want to be farmers, live near a railroad connection, and he's going to then pay to build his railroad, or he's going to pocket the money, whatever the case might be. If Dylan's unscrupulous, he's going to pocket the money. If he's honest and trustworthy, which we know he is, he's going to build the railroad. He's going to use some of that land to set up towns every 25 miles or whatever the case might be, or set aside land for towns. The government giving Dylan land to build a railroad is not laissez-faire. That goes against laissez-faire capitalism. But that's one of the examples when the government in the late 1800s is laissez-faire. The effect of railroads on the West, well, they moved a heck of a lot of people west. Do you remember when we did the document-based question on the West, and there was a poster, or an advertising poster for a railroad company urging people to move west, and they told them if they came they could be a banana planter farmer?
Was that the one with the cow on the roof?
No, yeah, and it had a cow on the roof too, but the other one was a poster that, as said, basically implied that if you went to Kansas you could grow bananas. Okay? That was for a railroad company which was urging people to move to Kansas using their railroad. They transported people west very cheaply and basically promised farmers that they would then transport their products back east very cheaply. Did they? No, they didn't, which is why farmers got really mad at railroad companies, because they charged them really high rates of transportation, and they charged them high rates for storing their grains before they actually transported them. Mining population, who made the money? The who is mostly men. Men from Ohio, Tennessee, New York, etc. moved west to mine gold and silver, get rich quick. They promised to come back in a year to the little wife and the children, and they would be the richest people in the neighborhood. The reality is the people who made the money in mining bonanza were the people who provided the services. The guy who owned the bar, the guy who owned the team of horses that took materials around, the guy who owned the laundry, the dining hall, the lady of the evening. Okay? Those are the people who made, the Levi Strausses, who made the money. What happened to that little guy who came from Ohio to make his fortune? He probably didn't make a fortune, but realized that land was pretty cheap, if not free, in the West, that he could set up a business or set up a farm for pretty little. So he telegraphed the wife back in Ohio and said, come sell the farm, come and bring the kids, which she did. And that's populated the West. Okay? The effect of gold discovery on an area. It was a boom and a bust economy. Okay? And Eddyville, we discover that there's gold in his area. Suddenly his town of 20 people goes to a town of 2,000 overnight, and it remains at 2,000 until they've gotten all the gold out of the ground. And then we hear that there's gold at Carloville, and so everybody swoops over to Carloville, and Eddytown is back to 20 people, and it dies out. It's a ghost town very shortly. And that's what happened in the gold and silver areas. The towns went up and down, up and down. Which ethnic group was subjected to lynchings in the West? A, Filipinos, B, Koreans, C, Irish, D, Chinese, E, Germans. Chinese. The people in the West who were discriminated against were Johnson's people, the Chinese. Okay? Joseph Glidden invented barbed wire. Good. Because of him, before Joseph Glidden, you could literally, if you can imagine it, go from Texas all the way to the Canadian border in Montana or in North Dakota without ever encountering a fence. Joseph Glidden invents barbed wire, and suddenly little homesteader Sam is fencing in his 160 acres to keep you off from your cattle. Or eventually ranchers are fencing in their ranches so that everybody else doesn't use their good grass. It caused range wars at first because cattlemen wanted to freely maneuver their cattle and were not able to do so. Who were the cowboys? The point of this question was to point out that over half of the cowboys in America were either African American or Hispanic. The folklore is they were all white, but that's not true. One of the heroes of Western literature is a character named Nat Love. In real life, Nat Love was a black cowboy. In the book, he's portrayed as white. Okay. What ended the cattle drives? Two things. One, fencing. Okay. You can no longer drive your cattle all the way from mid-Texas to the railroad in Kansas or Nebraska. The second thing that ended the cattle drives was the fact that railroads started going to Texas and picking up those same cattle, or to Wyoming and picking them up, whatever. You didn't have to drive them to the nearest railroad hub. And thirdly, there were some really bad winters and summers, drought-wise, blizzard-wise, etc., and it killed off a lot of the cattle. So that kind of helped end the drives too. Land laws 1800 to 1862 did what? How did they change? They start selling the land cheaper, less than $2 an acre, to the point in 1862 land is given for free. And they lessen the amount. In 1800 you still had to buy land in a 640 acre plot, which was far, 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 far more than you as an individual could handle. By 1862 you were getting how much for free? 160, okay? And getting 160 acres for free was called the Homestead Act, okay, which is the next term. So land laws gave you less land to have to farm at a cheaper price, to the point of free with the Homestead Act. Problems of farming on the plains, what did they lack? What were they affected by? They lacked a lot of moisture. If you think of the Great Plains like the Missouri River, so the eastern edge of Nebraska to the Rocky Mountains, all the way from Montana and North Dakota down to Oklahoma, there's not as much rainfall. There are very few trees. So the guy who comes into Nebraska and settles on a homestead is going to build his house out of sod. Remember sod houses? And he's going to live in that sod house for 3 to 5 years until he puts together enough money to order the wood to then build a lumber house, or a house made out of lumber. So it lacked moisture, it lacked trees. People were affected by the wind. There's a lot of wind in that part of the country. You read diaries of women, and there were some women who seemed to go crazy from the sound of the wind. The fact that there were Native Americans who weren't very friendly is another thing that affected the people who lived on the plains, because remember, as homesteaders moved in and railroad companies came, what happened to the buffalo? They were killed off, and the Indians were being pushed onto reservations, all those kinds of things.